What's going on, everyone? Thanks for stopping by Frankie's Family Homestead, and today is going to be an episode talking about finances and numbers and really tracking everything related to your maple season. Now, for us, we're going on our fourth year of tapping maple trees. The first year was just trying to get an idea of if we liked the hobby, and then from there, we really started to keep track of data. And data is important if you are trying to be smart about your finances and really try and hit break even with what you're spending and what you're getting out of it. Now, if you're somebody that just does not care, that's perfectly cool. I'm always trying to look at a return on investment and how I can get to break even and or start making a profit. Now this video is going to apply to all those that are new or fairly new at this hobby, such as myself, that are looking at the expenses that you're putting in and what you're getting out of it. So kind of on the agenda perspective, what we're going to be doing, items that we're going to discuss. The first two is going to be propane versus wood and the cost and time associated with it. It is a heated topic that comes up every year during maple season on the maple forums. The other topic that comes up is, do you keep the ice or do you throw the ice out? And what I'm referring to is the layer of ice that is on the 5-gallon pails. When you open up the buckets, there'll be a layer that's floating at the top. Another heated topic that I wish more people would kind of work along with each other across the aisle and have some compromise, because it is either you are this or you are that, and it's like almost a political debate. I'm going to go through on my spreadsheet and how I track all my trees, some of the supply costs associated with it, and then how we keep track of our numbers as far as what we're producing and what we're getting out of it. Now, this is not this information is not going to be for something that you guys, build it how you would like to, but if you're trying to get an idea of how do I track my stuff and you're just looking for maybe creative ways, hopefully this will help you. Hopefully this will help you with that. Just note, I am not a finance guy. I just like being structured and knowing what I'm putting into my hobby that I'm doing, and knowing that everything I'm doing is at least trying to be more efficient each year. So the first topic of discussion is firewood versus propane for heating, the heating source for your pans. Now, there's pros and cons to both, but what you'll see on the online, or if you're on like the Facebook groups or the forums, it is one or the other. Like, most people don't want to hear the other options that are available, but there's positives to both, and there are negatives to both. So propane, the pros. I'm sorry. Let me backtrack. We're talking about firewood. Firewood, the pros, the cons. The firewood, it's lower cost, especially if you have your own supply. So if you have a ton of woods in your backyard, it's pretty much costing you nothing as far as acquiring the wood. It can be readily available in your region. It potentially can enhance the syrup flavor. So this is one of the nice things, that if you are using firewood, you can have your own unique blend. The blend of whatever type of wood that you are burning, that smoke is going to get into the sap/syrup that you're boiling, and it's going to give it a really nice unique flavor once you are at that finished point. So if you're using a cherry wood or maybe a hickory or whatever, you're going to have a little bit of that taste associated from that wood burning smoke. So that is a really nice positive to it. The cons: it requires a ton of labor. I don't care if you're chopping your own wood, you're obviously in good shape, but also you have to have big equipment to be able to split logs. It is a time-consuming process, regardless if you're doing it by hand or with machine. It is harder to maintain a steady temperature when you are boiling your sap with a wood-firing heat source. You have to constantly monitor the boiling process, your temperature. You can't just walk away from it. Versus propane, you don't necessarily have to be micromanaging it the entire time. The temperature fluctuations, because if it starts to cool because you forgot to add wood, can also play a role in that. Now for propane, the pros, it's consistent, it's easily controlled heat. You turn it on, you can adjust it, the knobs on how much flame that you want to have over your pans. You can adjust that heat very, very, very easily. It's less physical labor. You don't need to gather or split wood. You just go grab it. And it's more predictable with results and time saving. It can be much faster to do. You don't have to wait for it to really heat up the pan. You can just turn it on, and within a minute or so you can get sap boiling pretty quick. Some of the cons, it's going to be more expensive than wood. However, I would argue this all day long. Typically, if you have multiple places that you can fill propane tanks, typically in the winter, your propane is going to be cheaper than it is in the summer. There's less people using propane, so a lot of places will put it on sale for you to purchase your propane. I pay $16 to fill a 20-pound tank, which is absolutely nothing. It takes me no time to go get it, and I don't have to split wood. Splitting wood is not free. All day long, it's not free. There is a cost to either have the equipment. A log splitter is not cheap. You're talking $1,000 for a good log splitter. Now, if you can rent one or whatever, there's ways to save. But if you're trying to do it in an efficient way without having to chop it all by hand, there's costs associated with that. And if you are chopping it by hand, there's time associated with it. So what's your time worth? Because now you're chopping wood, and you could be doing other things with your time. They argue it's less environmentally friendly compared to renewable wood sources. I'm not going to get into the environmental perspective of this. I'm an environmentalist from my schooling. I would argue this all day long, that propane versus wood, you're still burning a fuel. There's still smoke coming off it. I'm not gonna dabble in that. The downside is it doesn't offer traditional experience, potentially flavorful enhancement that wood might provide. This is 100% true. Propane's not going to have any type of unique taste added to your syrup versus wood. It's just a flame that's boiling sap. You're not going to get any enhancement with that. So really, when it comes down to it, it's what's your time worth? Is your time worth, if you have a ton of time, like, if I was close to retirement, or if my kids were older and I didn't have as many responsibilities, I probably would use wood. I think the idea of having a unique flavor to the syrup is a really cool thing to have. However, I have little ones. I don't have the time to just split wood and prep for all that, and also monitor my sap as it's boiling and making sure that it is staying at a constant temperature. I use the propane because I can put a camera on my sap that's boiling and check it occasionally. As long as it doesn't get too low, I'm good to go on that temperature because it's going to continue to flow really well. So really, you have to decide what's your time worth. You can find cheap 20-pound bottles. You don't have to be paying $20, $25 for a bottle. There are places that will sell it really cheap. You just have to look around in the winter time. So the other one is, the other question always comes up is, do you keep ice or do you discard the ice that is floating on top of your 5-gallon pails? So if you're storing your sap outside, once you've gotten it from your trees and you're waiting to do a cook, and you have a bunch of 5-gallon pails lined up on the north side of your house, and you get ready to start boiling your sap, and you open up the buckets and you see a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of ice floating on top. What do you do with it? Do you discard it? Do you boil it? Is there actually any sugar in it? What's it worth? I'm going to tell you right now, this is such a ridiculous argument online. I throw the ice out. If it's 1 inch or less floating on top, it's primarily all water, frozen water, that may have a small amount of sugar concentrate in it. Now, if it's a bucket that's 3/4 of the way frozen, or maybe, 1/4 of the way frozen, I'm probably going to still cook that. But if it's just a top layer, basically it's doing you a favor by getting rid of some water and leaving more heavy concentrate of sugar in the sap that you can boil. Now, you're going to see online people argue, well, a popsicle is frozen and that has sugar in it. This is true, but I look at it from, if anyone watches the show Gold Rush, when you are panning for new ground and you do a pan and you only have 3 flakes in a pan, yeah, it has gold in it, but it's not worth their time and effort to go strip that area and mine out that material for that gold, because they'll end up losing money on it. Now, if they find a pan that has 10 to 15 flakes of gold in it, that's worth their time and effort to be able to mine it and then extract that material for gold. I kind of look at it the same way as this. Yeah, the top layer of ice will have some sugar in it, but the downside is you have water boiling, and then you put a giant piece of ice in that container that you're boiling, that sap. Now you just killed your temperature, and you have to wait for that to all melt. Then you have to wait for tons of energy to reheat that sap up, and you end up wasting more time with that than you absolutely need to be. And to me, it's not worth my time with just a small layer of ice that sits on top. So just keep that in mind of what it is. Now you can test it. There are ways to test it to see what the sugar content is in your ice. If you have the time to do it and you have a really good way to thaw without having to use extra energy to thaw that ice, then it's worth it. Like, for example, a lot of us will have a preheat process that they're using the energy that's already being used to boil the sap, but they also have another container that can borrow some of that energy to heat the sap, the pre-sap that you're going to be using to boil. Then that's an option that you can do. But overall, you gotta consider what your time's worth. It probably won't be worth your time to use frozen ice that is just a top layer. I would just discard it and just use the heavier concentrate water that you have, the sap that's in there for boiling. All right, so for the next part, we're gonna talk some of the data on how I collect it. Now, obviously, you do not have to follow how I do this, but this is just me being able to track and become more efficient each year and trying to break even or hit that break even point. So first off, I like to keep track of the actual seasons and when they start and when they end. Here in Ohio, we have, so for example, my first year that we tapped maple trees was in 2023. The actual official season ran from February 5th to March 25th. Since I got such a late start in the season, my season was only from the March 4th to March 21st. And then in 2024, the season ran from February 5th to March 5th. And then in 2025, ran from February 1st to March 15th. So this gives you an idea of when you should really start prepping. And so depending on what state you live in or region, there are forums online, especially Facebook. Check your local, like there's a Northeast Ohio maple syrup hobbyist group that we're in. Like I keep tabs and talk with those individuals of when they're thinking about tapping, like what's going on with the weather pattern, because you could be 50 miles from somewhere else and that weather pattern is going to be completely different. So if you are looking, try and get into a group that's in your area and kind of talk amongst yourselves to see typically when would you start tapping. Most will start right around mid-February. Last year was kind of out of the norm because February actually stayed really cold in Ohio. Typically you start getting out of freezing temperatures in February. Since the early 2000s, that's kind of statistically been how it's been. But for this last year, it stayed frozen, so the season kind of was a little wonky. The other thing that I do is I keep track of all the trees that we have, what kind of tree it is, and the size of the tree, and then the location of it. The reason I do this is when I'm prepping to know what size bucket I'm going to attach to that tree, I know right off the bat from having this list when I'm prepping to go into the woods, hey, all these are going to be 2 gallons, so I get all my 2-gallon buckets ready to go, or if I'm needing 3 or 5s. That also helps if I keep an understanding of which trees flowed really well the previous year. And so if I have a tree that flowed really well, but I didn't have time to check it all the time, I put a 5-gallon pail associated with it. That way I can go maybe 4 days and not check versus having to check maybe every other day. But this is just an idea. If you know what trees you're going to be using, make sure you know what maybe size bucket you're going to put with it. And that way when you're getting your setup going, you can start prepping with a list of where you need to go and save time instead of having to go back and forth or guess what bucket size you need. Then I have another tab for the cooking process, talking about everything I kind of just invest in. Everything in red has been purchased. I keep track of all the cost. There's costs associated with this hobby. There's going to be upfront costs, and you're not really going to see a payback. I didn't really start seeing a payback until last year, where we were getting closer to break even. But the previous years, we were pretty far in the hole for a hobbyist. Which is okay because the experience is worth it. But if you're looking from like a finance point, like you're not going to break even the first few years. And then I keep track of each year of how I did, and this is something I think all people do. Some will write down in their sugar shack how each year was, the temperatures associated with it. Like most people will track like how their season went, how many gallons they acquired of sap, and how many gallons they produced of syrup. Like that's pretty standard. But my first year, I didn't have a really good organization way of tracking everything. I just tracked the different boils that I did. So I only did 2 in 2023, and we only had 3 trees tapped. We did one March 12th and then March 20th. But I just like to think out loud of what worked, what didn't go well. I noticed that I had a lot of sugar crystals or suspended solids in my jars after canning them, and just talking about like what do I need to do to get better for the next season. This just helps prep, because after you're done with maple season, you kind of forget about it. You got summer and then fall, and then like maple season comes up pretty quick. Because once November, December hits, like you're only 2 months out before the season begins. For 2024, I got a little bit better. Start color coding and really organizing and keeping track of the total time it would take from start to finish to boil and then have actual maple syrup. So, for example, on February 12th, we had tapped 15 trees. The first batch I did was 25 gallons, and it took almost 12 hours. So 12 hours of boiling, filtering, bottling, cleaning, all that. That's a long time. That's a dedication amount of time for just 25 gallons. I talk about the issues I had about keeping the propane tanks warm. If the propane tanks get cold, then you have issues with the flow. They don't flow as well. You end up having to swap them out or thaw the tanks out. So trying to figure out ways to keep them warmer. And we did that for each boil that we did. So we did 4 total for that year, and just talking about the different processes of what I was able to improve. From there, I like to do the final count for 2024. So we had a total sap gallons collected from the trees. We had 87 gallons collected. We made a total of 144 ounces of syrup, which came to about just over a gallon of syrup that year. Now, syrup is a 40-to-1 or 60-to-1 ratio, so 40 gallons of sugar maple sap will produce about 1 gallon of syrup. And then silvers and reds, you need about 60 gallons to produce 1 gallon of syrup. Most of mine are going to be silvers. I do have some sugars on the property, but that's a pretty comparable number. Probably should have been a little higher, but there's waste associated with it because I was gravity filtering everything just before the bottling process. You lose some material with that. I talk about the tree flow, how well the trees did as far as flowing, how well, which trees did well, which ones did not. Keep in mind, you might have a huge sugar maple on your property. It may not flow right away because that thing is solid frozen. It'll take a while for it to start thawing before you start having sap actually coming out of that tap. If you have a sugar maple that is maybe a 15-inch diameter one, and it starts thawing quicker, you'll start getting some pretty good flow from that tree versus one that might be 24, 30, or 36-inch in diameter. I talk about how the season went, and then the big number, the cost. What did it cost for this season? So everything from supplies, taps, buckets, energy, $640 it cost for me to do that season to acquire just over a gallon of syrup. Dave Ramsey would say that's not worth it, but everyone else would say that's not bad. And for me, the return on investment is the experience of learning something new, the enjoyment of being outside, the enjoyment of being with your kids if your kids are involved with this, and then also the final product of knowing that you made something that is pure 100% syrup, way better than anything you buy at the stores, and that you're becoming more sustainable than your friends or maybe your peers. So that to me is where the return on investment makes sense. And then we move into 2025, and this was the year where we really started looking at the top right: efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. We tapped early on because I kept track on our forums, the Northeast Ohio Maple Hobbyist forums, of when people were starting to tap, keeping a look on weather patterns. As soon as you started seeing that weather getting into the mid to higher 30s or into the 40s during the day, that's how you knew it was ready to tap. However, for last year, February hit a cold snap for 2 weeks after that, and we actually didn't do any boils for 2 weeks after that. I talk about the different expenses I put into here so I know how much money I'm spending. So we upgraded some equipment. We added a vacuum filter, which there'll be a separate video on a vacuum filter. But glass bottles, you have to bottle it somehow. The tanks, if you bought tanks or if you added propane, there's costs associated with that. So it's really important. Even the small little things, even it's $6, like a vacuum sealer, it cost me $6. That's still money that I put into this operation. I want to know my total expenses and what I need to do to break even. So we had we did 5 boils. And first one was February 4th, and then the next one wasn't until the 25th. And that's what I'm talking about. It was cold for the middle of February. So the trees refroze and nothing was flowing for 2 weeks. But the big change from the previous year was the first batch that we boiled in 2024 was 25 gallons. The first batch that we boiled in 2025 was also 25 gallons. But the difference was I was able to cut 4 hours off my time. So this was only 7 hours from start to finish versus last year was almost 12 hours. So what changed? Well, I got smarter on how we did the boil with adding a preheat to sap that would soon go to the actual boil process. I got smarter on the finished boil. I let it boil a little longer on the outside versus before I brought it in. And then the filtering process, adding a vacuum filter, saved me all the time in the world because it's instant when you turn the vacuum on. The canning was a lot easier because we had a spout to be able to can and fill the bottles. And then getting better using a hydrometer, which we'll go over in another video, which is to test your bricks, which is essentially your sugar content, and making sure you have clear syrup. That's the most important thing, is you really want clear quality syrup that doesn't have suspended solids or having sugar crystals forming on the side or at the bottom of the bottle. I talk about some of the successes and some of the issues with my 20-pound tanks, using that as propane, and what we need to do to try and improve for the next boils. And then we get down to the bottom of what worked really well, and then some of the summary. For this year, design a be kind, please do not touch, because we had some individuals that got a little curious in the woods and decided to empty some of our buckets out. No, it wasn't a deer, and no, it wasn't a bear. Footprints aren't those type of animals. Human footprints. Want to continue using more icing buckets instead of purchasing 5-gallon buckets. So just some final thoughts with that. But the big thing is the data. How well do we do? Where are we at as far as break even? So the setup time, and this is getting everything out of where it was stored, kind of prepping, getting everything ready for tapping, took me 2 hours. The end of season cleanup time, 4 hours. 4 hours of my time just cleaning hose lines, cleaning taps, buckets, lids, just a ton of time associated with the cleanup. tapping all the trees, going out into the woods took me almost 3 hours to do. And then collecting sap every other day or once a week, collecting it almost 10 hours. So this is a big chunk of your life for this hobby. So it is time consuming when you start tapping a lot of trees, and if it's not super close. So just keep that in mind. How can you reduce some of this time for collecting? The sap and syrup. So the number of taps, we had 38 taps last year. We used 19 2-gallon buckets, 3 3-gallon buckets, and 16 5-gallon buckets. The total gallons of sap collected in 2025 was 151 gallons. The total ounces of syrup produced was 406, or 3.2 gallons of syrup. So this is a 75% increase from last year of the amount of sap collected, and 181% increase in syrup. So those are significant numbers of going bigger. And that should be like that because we doubled our operation, went from 15 taps to 38 taps from the previous year. Now comes the actual data, the money part. Time efficiency savings from 2024 to 2025. It was averaged that I saved about 2.5 hours per boil. So each time from 2024 to 2025, I was saving about 2.5 hours this year because I got a lot more efficient on how the operation was. That's critical when you factor in I did this 5 times. You're over 15 hours of savings. Total time spent from start to finish, I spent 42 hours of my life boiling and finishing. Average time spent start to finish, 8.4. So each boil I did took about 8.5 hours. So that, now if I know that's important, because if you're trying to figure out, okay, I got Saturday available to boil, how long is it typically going to take me to boil, and from start to finish, sap to syrup? Well, if you have good data that says on average it's going to take me 8.5 hours, you can plan around that. You can start at 5 a.m., you can start at 6 a.m., heck, you can start at 12 in the afternoon if you have that time later in the day. So keep track of how long it takes you to do a boil, because you can work around that type of schedule. Total money spent for this year was $490. So compared to last year, we're at $680, I think. So we're getting into the $1,200 total now of this hobby. The total money recovered, I don't have the final numbers. We're still selling what's last of our syrup. I anticipate about half of that, getting about half of that back. Now the money we make, we give for our kids' piggy banks. I don't actually see any of that money. I don't really care. I like this hobby. We all have hobbies that we like to waste our money in. I waste my money on this and in cars. So it's a fun hobby, so I don't really expect a return on investment. Any money we make, I just give it to our kids' piggy banks because they're involved, and it's just showing them, if you put hard work in, you can be rewarded for that work. And then finally, the big one, the time spent with the kiddos, priceless. The time spent with my kids, going out in the woods, spending time with them, you can't replace that, especially with the younger ones because they grow up so fast. So just keep that in mind as well, that even though you spent some money, if you're doing it with your family, that's worth everything. And then we're just starting to get ready for 2026. I'm starting to get information going. I've spent a little bit of money this year, but I imagine I will not be at that 490 nor that 680 from 2024. I'm looking to probably be right on $100, maybe $200 in cost, and we'll start really trying to figure out how we can be even more efficient. So that is basically just in a nutshell how I keep track of data. I know this is a long video. I will break this up into different chapters. If you stayed on for this whole thing, I appreciate it. Please, if you can, hit that like and subscribe, because I'm really trying to look at ways to maybe do a course for hobbyists, small hobbyists like myself. I'm really trying to improve with this, because you either have like really big operations that give their information out of what they do, or you have videos from people that provide really good content, but maybe it's not that well organized. But I really want to get others involved because this is such a fun hobby. And it is, obviously, as you can see, I'm doing 30 minutes of this. This is my favorite hobby. We appreciate you guys stopping by, and as always, hit that like and subscribe button.